Recommender systems, man. This was recommender systems on steroids, I think. The conversation we just had. Dude, talked to Marc and Amr. They are working at eezylife, and eezylife, we both had no idea what it was going into it. We just knew they were doing some pretty cool stuff with recommender systems. Turns out they are, I mean, you downloaded the app, right? Since we chatted with them. Do you have any updates? Has it changed your life yet?
So it hasn't quite changed my life, but I have to say, what they're building could save your relationship. It's amazing to see how they've kind of sourced all the possible things that you could ever do around you, and then also give you facilities to like loop your friends and maybe significant other in. Personally, I've always hated like trying to rally the troops to like go do anything. And so like this app helps take care of that. And that's super cool. And I'm very excited to explore more.
Yeah, it gets you one step of the way there. And the way it does that is by giving you recommendations on things that you like. And so we dive into how they got all of the information to be able to personalize the recommendations. We also jumped into like, what was it? Multi-modals and figuring out that. I mean, I love talking with you. First of all, I didn't even mention Skylar. Like, it's great to have you back on here for me. Your cameo appearance is so cool. I know that I'm not the only one. Lots of people love you, as you know. And it's cool because you worked on recommender systems at LinkedIn. So you were able to go really deep with these guys on it.
Yeah, definitely. And it was exciting. I haven't worked on recommendation systems in a couple of years now, and so it was a good return to the roots. And the challenges that these folks are doing is kind of amazing. A lot of people working on recommender systems are doing unimodal recommendations where there's only one type of thing you're recommending. And there's a lot of interesting challenges when you start mixing in different modes of recommendation. So, they're scraping all the movies you could possibly watch, recipes, restaurants you could go to, museums, concerts, activities, and all of these things have different types of information. And so it's cool to hear how they kind of like approach those challenges. And that was super exciting for me.
Well, not only that, and of course it's cliche by now, but cleaning the data is half the battle or 80% of the battle. And how they were talking about getting movies and the data from movies, the metadata from Netflix is different than the metadata from Hulu and the metadata from HBO Max, and how they can aggregate all of that and then get it so it comes out with a solid recommendation was fascinating. But then I really liked the hardest piece that they mentioned in the beginning when we were talking to him. And Marc said, like, it's not necessarily hard to know that someone is interested in watching a stimulating documentary about the rainforest. It's hard to know what is a quality stimulating documentary about the rainforest. So figuring out what exactly, like the quality of the recommendations, not in the, is it personalized to me, more in the fact that is the actual thing that I'm recommending good, right? Like, is it useful? Is it valuable?
Absolutely, yeah. This is like the one of the core challenges of recommender systems is that you need to know a lot about the thing you're recommending and also a lot about the preferences of who you're recommending to. And it's interesting to hear that they solved one half of that, or at least they feel they have. They understand the user's preferences, but I can definitely imagine that even amongst my friends who say they're into intellectual movies, and I live in LA, so tons of people say that, they all have like disagreements about like what an intellectual movie actually is. And so like, I imagine that has to be a very hard problem because it's probably, there's no ground truth for this.
Yep. So this is the conversation. We're going to jump into it with Marc and Amr. Marc is the COO, as I will mention again in just a second, and Amr is the head of data science at eezylife. Go check out this app. Tell us what you think. This is by no way in any means sponsored by eezylife. We just thought they were doing awesome stuff with recommender systems, and it's worth like checking out what they're doing, like digging behind the covers or underneath the covers a little bit and hearing about it. So that is all. The last thing I will say is if you have anything that you think we could be doing to make this podcast better, please reach out to us and let us know what you think we should be doing better. We've got really thick skin, especially Skylar. He's been called all kinds of different names on the internet for his love of Kubeflow. And myself also, it's hard to get at me and make me angry. But that being said, we want to hear from you. Like, we would love to hear from you. Tell us what you think we could do better, or if there's somebody particular that you want to hear us interview. That is not Chip, because she is on the list of people that we're going to interview in the fall. So that's coming if you're waiting for it. And last but not least, if you enjoy this episode, please send it to one friend that you think would also enjoy it. So maybe you have a recommender systems fanatic in your friends group or someone that you work with. Send it to them. I'm sure they would love it. So let's get into it. Without further ado, we are going to talk with Marc and Amr from eezylife. So today we are here with Amr and Marc, the people behind eezylife. Marc is the COO and Amr is the head of data science or head of machine learning. You guys are doing some wild stuff with recommender systems. And Marc, I know that we wanted to jump into how you build products also, like the specific cultural pieces behind building these recommender systems and just building difficult systems. So maybe we can start out with a bit of context and you can tell us what exactly eezylife is. I checked it out. I'm not sure if it would work for me because I have literally nothing around me in my area. So what I think eezylife does, I'm not sure if it works, but tell us what it is and then I'll tell you if it will actually be of use to me.
Well, okay, so general idea of eezy was essentially that we noticed that the whole ad model was working really, really well, right? Like the whole personalization aspect and companies putting their products on ad platforms and those then being recommended to users. But we didn't really like that way around, right? Where you're giving kind of recommendation systems to companies to target users. But we thought, is there a way that we could create a platform or an app where users go to actually target products that they like, right? And so we wanted to see if essentially you could get all these product catalogs from companies. So like if you had a partnership with someone like Ticketmaster or OpenTable or Spotify, you name it, could you get just like all of their products, like the songs that they have or the concerts that they have or the tables that they have at restaurants, et cetera, et cetera? And then could you put that all in daily, analyze it, etc., and then match that to users? So the idea really is to make every user's day just more fulfilled by giving him personalized product or personalized recommendations that are based on all kinds of things. So it's like if you say, I want to do something right now, it takes your location into account, takes the weather into account, takes your mood into account, etc., etc. And then basically says, hey, listen, like here's a table at a restaurant, or here's a concert you should still go to that still has tickets, or there's a museum or whatever it is. Watch a movie on Netflix and tries to optimize for that. Obviously has some static information like, I don't know, your Netflix. So obviously we try to give you more movies on Netflix. Yeah, that's kind of the general idea, and that's what we do.
So it would work for me then. I was a little bit confused on what it was. I thought it was just a place that would recommend places to go out. I didn't realize it taps into your life and the specifics that you enjoy so much that even if I'm a loser living on the countryside and don't have anything around me, you still know about my Netflix and Spotify and you can recommend good stuff there. I'm guessing you have to integrate with all of these different tools.
Yeah, so that's really interesting. So we have some of those tools that you can like fully integrate with. However, we've seen that sometimes it's actually not that bad to not use them because you take a super different approach to what the users used to. Because if you just rebuild like kind of what Netflix has as a recommender, then like it's going to be a bit tough. So what we do is we simply pull in that information. We just take a very different approach to what you would like to see and what we think you might like to see and what products you're going to see that are very, very different to what Netflix would show you.
Are you asking specific questions for me as a user when I join to get a better idea of what I like and what I do?
Yeah, so we have a 5 minute onboarding in our app that actually has a super high completion rate. Like we noticed that like users will tell you anything if they feel that this will help them on a personalization aspect. Like it's honestly it's incredible. Every single time we think we're adding too many questions, users are like, give me more, let me tap on more things that I like, you know?
So from a recommendation point of view, I'm guessing that is incredible because the data that you have to work with is so much richer and so you can do so much more with it.
Yeah, I think I'll give a very brief answer here and then maybe Amr you jump into that. So yes. So it's interesting because we basically have two major problems. We have the problem of like knowing enough about the thing, about the product, and then we have knowing what the user would want. And weirdly, those are always very much the opposite. Like whenever you clearly know what the user wants, it's very, very hard to know that that product has that. And whenever you very clearly know that this product has that, it's very difficult to know if that's exactly what the user wants. So, as an example, clearly defining a romantic restaurant or clearly defining a intellectually stimulating movie is very hard. Knowing that the user, like telling the user, like, do you want an intellectual stimulating movie, is actually not that hard. Like in that specific case, right? Um, and then showing that to the users also, that's a whole different thing. That's like, how do you actually convince them that it has what you're saying? So we use a feature-based approach. We use a kind of more like black box approach, like a more like collaborative filtering approach. But maybe Amr, you can jump in here, like from feature-based or collaborative filtering-based approach.
Yeah, I just want to say that we also have the interesting property that we have. The catalog is not restricted to one provider only. If you're talking about movies, it's whatever providers that we added. So you are more free to recommend more products or items to the user. Yeah, as Mark said, it's there are a lot of work that can be done on extracting features from the items. If we're talking about the movies, the obvious thing is to look at the text data, the plot itself, and the reviews, what people mention about this movie. And it's a very interesting example. The intellectual movies, that you can infer that with language models, and you can have this feature about this movie. You can say that it's action-packed, it's based on true story, it's an intellectual movie, or versus an easy watching movie. And then the next problem is to match it with the current mood of the user. If it's like, and the time of the day, etc., and whatever you know about the user, to recommend something that is, for example, easy wash at this time.
Yeah, it's very interesting. You bring up the point of, the catalog coming from multiple providers. I'm very curious just to hear a little bit about some of the challenges coming with that, because I imagine that the data formats essentially of what you can get from different providers definitely varies, and I imagine that that's a challenge if you're trying to generate multimodal recommendations. So, love to hear a little bit about the challenges you face there and how do you solve them essentially.
I mean, the biggest one, the obvious one is the deduplication, when like are actually identifying that this item is the same thing. It's more obvious with like with movies, it's easier because they all kind of use IMDb IDs or universal identifiers. But if we're talking about restaurants, for example, you kind of restrict it to the name of the restaurant and the location, etc. And you need to infer that these two entities are the same. So there's a lot of work that happens in identifying these unique items and linking them together from multiple sources, and it grows exponentially if you have whenever you add one more source. And you need to be clever about how you divide this problem, and you only deduplicate within a subset of candidates of items that needs to be deduplicated. And also, we have this problem with images. Let's say we get images from multiple sources from the same restaurant, and we need to avoid showing duplicate images from the same angle, from the same perspective. And it's Actually, easy to implement these days with embedding and just finding similarity or finding cluster of images that look similar to each other. But the challenge is in processing the large amount of data. So we label and deduplicate over 20 million images whenever we add and just more new data. So it's challenging from MLOps side.
So when you say you label those, you mean like in-house you have some like labeling solution? Like how do you, like 20 million is a lot of things to label.
It is. So yeah, we're using Clip. It's amazing because as you know, it's out of the box and you can just give it labels and you can just give it the words and it will label them. But the challenge is how to run it and how to scale it up with 20 million. I don't know what to say about that. Like it's a big problem, but parallelizing, we use multiple GPUs, and recently we got our hand on a very cool tool and slash infrastructure. I don't know if you guys have heard of it. It's called Model. Their website is model.com. I think they're still in beta, Mark, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do
So
you
they
spell
provide
that? How do you spell that?
MAODAL.
Oh, Eric Bernhardson's startup. Yeah,
exactly.
I have
Yes.
access to it
Yeah.
too. Crazy, blows my mind how great it is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, as a data scientist who doesn't know much about cloud, I think it gives you superpowers because you can technically specify the competing needs that you need, and just it scales up and it uses multiple GPUs, etc. So you don't need to write Docker files or worry about spinning up instances, etc. And since all of these models are hosted on lots of models that we use for embedding or Clip itself are hosted on what's it called? Either TensorFlow Hub or Hugging Face. So it's really easy to load these models and do everything on cloud. Even so, this tool model can connect to your database, to your AWS, to your Git, and everything. You give it credentials as secrets, and then it can pull. For example, in the images example I gave, it pulls all the URLs from our database, does the labeling, and store it back to our database. It fetches the model from Docker, from TensorFlow Hub, does the inference. Everything happens and it fetches from the database and writes back to the database, and it knows automatically how many GPUs it needs based on the loads. Yeah.
Yeah, that's super cool. You know, when I asked the original question about, you know, how you handle this, I don't know if you were about to follow up, Mark. We maybe went off on tangents, but it looked like you might have had something to add to the discussion around how you handle multimodal recommendation.
Yeah, I mean, I think the important bit is there just so the different data sources, like or what especially our data team has worked on a lot, and our CTO is like an absolute hero on this, is that we basically found like the basic identity of any activity type, right? Like in the end, like restaurants have certain features, or events have certain features, and movies have certain features. And we kind of always decide based on like what we think actually as a product is important to users is what we're going to map. So we get
Oh, that's cool.
these vast amounts of data with loads of different features, and we kind of say, okay, listen, like every restaurant has an address, a lat long, categories, some atmosphere labels, and images and titles and whatever, right? But like everything else that we might not need, we don't map, and we also have kind of a minimum requirement and like a maximum requirement kind of thing, right? So that's how we did that, and that's, I think, actually where kind of a lot of our work went into, is like, how do you actually get all these different companies and product catalogs to kind of all work in one? Like if you get events on eezy, they will be from like 30 different providers, right? But you will never notice as a user because it kind of even checks out like, oh yeah, this is the same thing but from a different provider. Let's combine those. Let's give you the one where we think the better experience is on because we know they have a better UX at checkout and stuff like that. So like we do all kinds of things there. But yeah, I mean the putting the data together was a nightmare, but now it's getting kind of quite nice.
Did you streamline that? So it used to be difficult. Now you feel like you have it under control. Is that just because you have been able to ingest so much data and label so much data that you feel like you're a bit ahead of it? Or did you figure out the processes for that and now you know that if you're going to be ingesting all this data, you can handle it? Or was it something totally different?
I think as a startup, because you don't have infinite resources, you have to find like quite clever solutions to really big problems and like standardize hardcore. Like if because Amr and I speak about this a lot. Like we ever find like especially he finds like these great solutions for very small machine learning problems. And we're like, and we try it out, and then we notice after like 2 weeks, like there's no way we're maintaining this, right? So we just stop and we just go back to the original solution. And so that made us kind of think very clearly like what like how can we make everything into the same buckets that no matter who would start this, they just need to like sit down and just understand like it needs to go from here all the way to here, and as long as it arrives here it can be recommended, right? And this is kind of what we really worked on. And so we call this like candidates, for example. So candidates are materialized Postgres views, right? And they're these insane views. I think we do get an award for like the most lines of Postgres ever written that essentially pull in from loads of different tables, etc., all the information that we need and put them in exactly the format that our recommender needs. And this is completely standard. And like when a new product comes in, all that a data team has to do is literally we have someone and she just says, and she's amazing at this. Like she is the most accurate human being on the planet, and she can literally get something new in, see there. She literally gets their API output and just says this isn't this, maps to this isn't this, ingest it, and it's done. And someone builds a cron job, it gets ingested daily, gets put in there, automatic. The materialized view refreshes every so many hours, and the recommender can handle it. And that's really like amazing actually for us.
Yeah, I think we solidified this process iteratively, and we reached this conclusion that we need, from the recommender people, need to look at standardized view that gives you what can be recommended, and data team work on reaching this standard view, for example. And it came iteratively. Like by time we realized what's the standard approach should look like. And I think at this stage we're very comfortable in adding either a new data source or like scraping or opening in a new city and ingesting data from all the sources in this city. So scaling up became much easier now.
You know, one of the things that I don't know if I'm getting wires crossed here, but it sounds like something you said earlier about, it sounded like you built an ontology of sorts of like, hey, these are the different types of events we have. And so like we have like movies, and these are the features that maybe correspond to a movie, restaurants, here's the things we need. And so very curious as to like from a modeling perspective, how you're kind of like thinking about doing that. I imagine, I'm not sure if you have like literally one model that's like operating on this multimodal. So at LinkedIn, there's a lot of work done on multimodal recommendation. Like in the feed, you see like jobs and ads, et cetera, pop up. And usually that's done where you have like separate models and some kind of second pass ranking. So very curious just like how you approach that, given that it seems you have like diverse feature sets based on the type of content.
So we still join these, like we divide them into multiple scorers, each model, and we combine them, sometimes rule-based, sometimes like an additional teacher model that join all of them together. But yes, there are some universal features that you can use across domains, and we're trying to increase these features. But at the moment, for example, we recommend recipes at home and we recommend restaurants. The reason why we added recipe is that I guess at some point during the lockdown, we just put more effort into home activities. But we found it very useful because if you learn the user preferences on on one domain, for example, you learn their preferences on food, you can apply it to restaurants and you can apply it to recipes. The same thing when you're recommending movies at home or in cinema or for music. Um, um, One example, this is the content-based aspect, of course. So one example that of a cool byproduct of integrating the user preferences on music from streaming providers is that you can notify them about their about concerts that are happening in the city with their favorite artists. Like this thing, we never thought about this feature when we started implementing this, the music recommendation. But it turns out probably the coolest and the easiest thing to do.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing is the difference between I think the three major things is like purely feature based, so that's like super like category focused. Then we have very embedding, like text embedding focused, and then we have kind of collaborative filtering focused. And we actually think that the most interesting is when you bring all of those together plus certain scores that are very, let's say, very rule based, as Amr said. So like if you say you want something tomorrow evening, then like it just needs to be open tomorrow evening, right? So like that is also a score for us essentially, but it just really says like this isn't like the scores like filter this out, right? But you know, no matter how good it is, and it's really interesting because you actually notice that this is really hard to communicate to users, by the way. Like they will say like I want a concert tonight, and then I don't know, it's a Monday, and they're like, this is not my favorite artist, and you're like, well, I mean, he's probably not performing tonight, it's a Monday. You know, so like it's really hard to get this over to users. Sometimes it's like, listen, with the specifications you gave us, this is the best we can do. So we work a lot with like a matching percentage there, and like try to show the user like we've integrated, like you can literally get like 27% matching, which like should indicate to you like, listen, you asked for this, but it's not good, like we are aware, kind of thing.
That goes
Yeah, it
back to
definitely
what I
makes a
was
lot of
talking about
sense.
with me living on the countryside, thinking like there's nothing around me, and what are you going to be able to recommend? So, Mark, I want to go off on a little bit of a tangent because you are the COO, but it seems like you're super technically developed in a way that I was not really expecting. Is it just like standard practice for people at eezylife to be able to talk in depth about these technical pieces, or is this something that you came with the background?
So I studied something called knowledge engineering, and had a very like I have a technical background. I do have to say that like I would say I have a very weird knowledge today, or because I kind of know how everything works together, but I'm pretty sure if you would ask me to do Amr's job, I would not advise that. So it's kind of like I know exactly what Amr's working on, and I understand very much the input and output. But when I see him using a Jupyter notebook, I get a bit jealous. Like that's kind of where we are, I would say.
Oh, that's
Class.
awesome. Yeah, I think a lot of the stuff we've covered has been super interesting, talking about the multimodal recommendations. But I imagine that as you add on providers are obviously like adding new types of events. Really, just curious about how you think about handling cold start, particularly since you mentioned that there's like some collaborative filtering kind of methods that you use. So, is there anything you use to handle cold start here when you get new items?
Yeah, so it depends a little bit in which direction we're going. So from a product perspective, we do try to kind of obviously cross correlate and like not get things that like are completely new in that sense. But we also noticed that you can use text embeddings really interestingly to like cross-platform things. So, for example, no one really gives you museum recommendations based on which movies you like, right? So we actually found that like you get really cool like culture recommendations if you tell us which movies you like, right? Because it identifies like how
That's
these
so
movies are
awesome.
described by loads of different people, and then like how these, yeah, right. Like we found like, and we found really cool things. Like, I don't know, you were watching Scarface, and then like you got like the Cuban something like Mafia Museum or something like that recommended, or we found that like this Italian restaurant in New Jersey correlated really highly with The Godfather, right? Like
Dude,
really
that's
weird
so
stuff.
cool.
Yeah, but it's awesome, right? Yeah, so that's like, and we do a lot of like Amr is amazing at prototyping. So like what we do quite a lot is we always try to like validate with like, I think like what you would call like the 10%. Like we literally just say like, here's like some data, just try to run this and let's just look at results. And we literally look through like either like CSV files, or he builds like a little interactive tool or whatever. And we just look through it and we're like, is there anything here? Like, is there anything that we can use that is cool for product that like users, like we think like, okay, would users understand more why they got this? Or would this just enhance their experience far more, right? And then we try to prototype, and like he literally sits like an hour or two, like, or a day or two, and then we have like a super high frequency meetings. Like we meet like maybe like every hour we sit down, and he brings like, okay, we changed this and now look at that. And so we literally go through this like hardcore iterative approach, and then we come to scaling. Like then we are like, okay, like now we know that this works. Now that's kind of our problem though sometimes, because we're like, oh, this worked really well. How many reviews do we have? And then it's like, well, 46 million. This might take a bit longer. So that's like sometimes like where we I think where human intuition kind of sometimes doesn't really understand the multiplications, right?
Yeah, yeah, that definitely makes a lot of sense. Love the iterative approach there. And it makes me wonder, one of the things that I often dealt with when we're at LinkedIn was the concept of very bad recommendations that basically broke user trust. So you can see examples of this, people complaining about it all over LinkedIn all the time of like, I'm some VP and you just recommended me an internship or something like that. It's like clearly a bad recommendation. So just curious, like, do you have like an analog to that? Are there like recommendations that are so bad that it's like, from a product perspective, a problem? And curious about how you think about like catching those, if you have any process to flag them, like, how do you handle that?
Um, Maybe I'll go into the product part, and then you go into like how we try to fix those technically. Like the best example is like you're a vegetarian, and now there's a place, and that place like does serve vegetarian. First of all, every restaurant claims that it's vegetarian, which was like our first problem. Every
Classic.
restaurant claims like we have
Classic.
amazing vegetarian food. So yeah, right. So you end up with things like, I don't know, so and so steakhouse says that they're vegetarian, and so we notice like, okay, damn, we can't rely on that. So then you need to, on one hand, understand like what's actually vegetarian, but then also like the first image, right? Like we actually, the images that you see are based on a labeled image set that actually finds the category that we think you're most interested in, and then tries to find the images that best correspond to that. And so, like, really bad is obviously that. Like, you say you want vegetarian food, and okay, it's an Indian place that mostly serves vegetarian food, but also has chicken. And like, first picture is chicken, right? And the guy's like, damn, like, what the hell, right? Even though great recommendation, right? Like, it's actually most of the menu is that. So that's like I would say the most extreme ones, or like as I said, like things that just don't work, like where the user just wants something that just simply isn't available, and but still expects us to deliver on that. Like we even had like user interviews during COVID where somebody asked for cinemas in like the height of COVID, like April 2020 or something like this. We had user interviews like when we were very very early, and like somebody literally was like, why the hell is this not giving me cinemas? And I'm like sitting there in this user interview, and like we had like 5 users by that time or 10 or whatever. And I was literally like, have you looked outside? Like literally, it's like mayhem. By the way, also COVID broke like every single test that we had in
Ooh.
our system, because no one ever expected there would be no events and no cinemas. Like that was it. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I want to jump into that a little bit more, but maybe Amir, did you want to get into the other side of this?
Yeah, we actually catch the cases where the user is disappointed, and we try to always improve that. So Specifically users who live outside the city center. Sometimes they get 0 candidates, and lots of candidates get filtered out. So we have this problem of there isn't much to recommend to this user in the first place, but we need to expand the radius of search, etc. You have the problem of like when you have a new user, you don't know much about their preferences. They're not included in a lot of models that we have, but at least we have the onboarding options that we have. So we try not to do something stupid at the beginning. As Skylar said, don't disappoint the user by giving them something that they obviously said that they hate or they dislike certain category or food cuisine or activity type. So yeah, first rule is not to disappoint the user, not to do something stupid before you start try to do something smart there. But yes, we catch all of these cases, and we use actually tools. Do you want to, Mark? Do you want to talk about the analytics that we use in the company in general
Yeah, I mean, we're
and the tools?
yeah, I mean, I think we're pretty intense on that level. So we have on one side like things that we just grab ourselves. So that's like we call them candidate responses. So this is literally like a stream of whatever you do with the recommendations that get fed into our database and get saved. And then on the other hand, we use something called Mixpanel, for example, that we've, I think, let's say, reconfigured a little bit to like what we need. So we literally send them like all our meta events that we know of for any recommendation and actually use that to figure out like obvious problems. And so this is actually like product people that look at this. So it's not even like very technical people. So like product people literally look at like, hey, this user said he wanted to do this Italian place, I don't know, with the map and this and nothing came out, or this came out, or whatever. And we literally look at like, okay, what do we think? Why did he not react to that, right? And then go from there. So there's all kinds of things that are quite interesting in that space. But it's very hard. It's like one of the hardest, and it seems so obvious to the user, but it's so hard. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. It's a real challenge to do this, especially in an automated fashion. And makes me wonder, like often in my experience of building recommendation systems, it's kind of a mix of you figure out like, okay, here's where the model is like messing up, and you start like mixing in heuristics with it, especially like in candidate selection and whatnot. So just curious to hear a bit about like what level of like curation maybe you do versus like hard-coded rules in the models. Like how does that all come together?
Yeah, I'm not sure what you mean by curation here.
So maybe just speak a bit to like whether like I imagine like it's not like literally just the outputs of the models you're serving. You've
No,
probably like
definitely.
yeah you've probably like learned like here's some rules that I've found that I need to kind of apply to like cut down on like what is reasonable. So just like curious about sort of what you've discovered there and what works for you.
Maybe the tourism factor is interesting, Amr. Like just to what we did with like where we basically looked at like we found out the number of reviews that things got, and we found out that the
Yeah.
models tended to like to prefer very touristy things, and so we actually had to build in another thing that would essentially kind of take like the review distribution within cities and try to actually optimize for like the 40th to like 70th percentile, because we just noticed if you purely left it to like if you didn't add that as a scorer, then you would like it would lead to like go into that direction because there's just so much more connection between like very touristy things, which would be a negative experience for the user, for example. So there we because we don't have that many like tour like our users are really heavy like people that live in those cities, and so that was for example something that we used. And then actually at the beginning we had to use a lot like minimum review thresholds because you notice like when you were getting underneath those, it just got really weird. Like I don't know, like Chinese restaurant with like one review where like somebody said like I don't know, this is fantastic. Like the owner was like, this is the best restaurant in the world, right? Like and this said this has all the categories in the world, and like suddenly this showed up everywhere because the model was like, wow, this is amazing. And so you had to put in like certain rules at some point.
Yeah, that's a really great example. You know, one of the things I was thinking about, in specifically because I didn't hear it come up at all, was curious of whether you use any sort of like social features. Because I think like a lot of the times, a big indicator of the things I want to do have a lot to do with what my friends want to do. So just curious whether you have anything in that space.
Yeah, so from a product perspective, actually our strongest cohort are couples, interestingly enough. So we've noticed, I think that single people really like to go to the same places because they know who they're going to meet there, versus people in a relationship really like to discover new things between themselves, right? So, and they often have that argument like, what are we going to do this weekend? Yo, you didn't organize anything. What movie should we watch? All these kind of things, right? And so we worked a lot on like figuring that out a little bit. Like we noticed that our users tend to be that. Um, and they can socially interact within the app. So you can suggest things to others, you can invite people, you can actually add people to the recommendations. So like if you say, I don't know, I want a movie with my girlfriend, it will take her preferences and yours and try to combine
Holy
those.
shit, that's awesome.
So and then give you a movie based on that. Yeah, so that's really cool stuff. It's very complicated, but we try to do that a little bit, and then it gets more and more complicated when you get into group dynamics. But like we have not tried to venture down that road too much. We're just integrating a chat now. We're also noticing that like group dynamics are weird because kind of you have the first step, which is like someone proposing something that they got recommended, then these people saying yes, and then them creating a plan. So like you need all these different things like based in your app as well.
So it's it feels like you all have done an incredible amount, and especially, I mean, you started right before COVID, right? And so to be able to like make such advances and leaps and bounds in the short amount of time, it's so cool to see. I'm wondering, what do you have next on the roadmap, not only for the product, but just like as you want to start incorporating machine learning into the product? Because I would consider this as like the typical product that we always talk about, where it's like it at its core, it is a machine learning product. Like you don't really have a product without machine learning, right? And for a lot of products out there, it's not like that. So are you feeling like, well, now we've got this Rexis on lock, we want to start branching out and doing more with other machine learning use cases? Or is it just diving deeper into Rexis and figuring out how you can recommend, like be the best recommender system out there? Do you have, what's the vision?
Um, so I definitely think that one big thing. So our app is chatbot based, which some users love and some don't. But I think a big next part will be to get the conversation, um, like actually build something that can you can interact with more dynamically. Right now, we've kind of closed off the kind of possible domain quite a bit, by not giving like infinite amount of answers that you can give. So you can't just start typing random things, because the possibility of being disappointed, I think, is just much higher than like being happy about like what you're getting. So that's definitely a part. I don't think that there's ever going to be a point where the rec system is like finished. Like I think that like just never happens. Um, I think what will be the most challenging and the most interesting is like if you want to venture away from like, what do you want to do tomorrow, let's say, right? But you more want to look at, how do I generally open this app and it changes my emotions to the better, right? Like, so you open Instagram or TikTok, that gives you this like endorphin kind of shock, right? It's like, and that's what they're trying to do, but I think it's actually like fairly negative. Like it's like cuts off very, very quickly. So like the utility after about 10 minutes of something like TikTok might not actually be that helpful. So the question for me really is like, can we build something that you don't only use when you have like something clear in mind, but that can literally help you in like different parts of your life? Like maybe it, motivates you at some point to, keep your habits, like keep your daily habits, or updates you on news or updates you on other things. But really this like, what we all have watched in movies, right? The whole like perfect like assistant where the guy wakes up or and the thing starts speaking to him and says, oh, this is what you've doing today, and don't forget that, and stuff like this.
And would that be in like the form of, oh, I'm trying to ask you for a movie recommendation and you tell me, actually, maybe you should meditate. Look at these 5 different meditations that are good.
Yeah, or yeah, good point. Like maybe it is that, or maybe the point is, I think what we've noticed is there is obviously the point where user knows what he wants, but very very often the interesting thing is more when you surprise the user with something like no one knows that they want that ad, right? Like, or nobody, like, that's not really what's beautiful about it. Like the thing is, if you actually manage to completely surprise the user with something, like we've had users that, for example, I'm pretty sure like downloaded it purely for restaurants and then actually started like thinking like, oh, these TV shows are kind of cool, right? Like, and if we can get to the point where you open it and it just says like, before you do anything, we're meditating for 5 minutes, right? Like, as you said, right? Like, and it just does that in a way that you're like, okay, damn, like, sure, why not, And if we can get to that point where you really have the feeling that the tech is working for you and not to, without trying to sound like we're trying to change the world, right? But like, without trying to make you stay there to make more money off you, but just simply there to provide you with the utility that the systems that we have produced today can have, right? Like a not for big company to target you, but like actually what will be best for you right now. And I think that's what we want to get to.
Yeah, I can totally see that because I think about the way that you talked about museums being based on the movies that I like. It's like a logical next step that I probably wouldn't go to a museum, but then I open this and then I'm like, whoa, this is a cool museum based on all of these things I'm really into right now. I got to go check it out. And I didn't even know it was in the city that I'm visiting. And so I see this being like the ultimate travel companion too. Like if I'm going to explore a new city, this is going to be like the first thing that I open because there's probably a million things in that city that I don't know about and I don't necessarily see when I Google about the city because Google doesn't understand me like this app does. So
Yeah.
Exactly. The idea is that what we're trying to achieve is that the eezy knows about all of your preferences and infer from your interactions. And when you need inspiration, it searches all of these million possibilities in the catalog, and based on the current mood, the weather outside, whatever events are happening in the city, it recommends things that make you utilize your time better. And if you're asking about the goal, I think we're already doing part of this, is that we give you a full day plan. We try, for example, if we send you to a concert, we try to find a restaurant before, for example, for you to have dinner at, and then somewhere to have drinks after, etc. So it sends you like a full day plan. And also, we already started doing part of this is that we
oh, nice.
recommend you people to do this thing with. So we know that from among you friends, these friends
Uh,
are also interested in attending this thing with
oh,
you
I
or
thought
doing this experience with you. So it's like the dream is that what should I do on this weekend? And we know your preferences. We know what's available in the city. We know who of your friends would be interested in joining you, and we just create a full plan.
Wow, I'm ready. Plug me into the
I thought you were
matrix.
gonna say you. Yeah.
that's no, I mean we use a lot of personality, interestingly enough, for this. So we didn't speak about this much because like that's like a little less of the, I guess, like purely ML part. But we have a few psychologists actually in the team, and what we started out with is that we actually looked at, we use something called the ocean model. Don't know if you guys know it, but it's essentially, it's like openness, conscientiousness, agreeableness, no, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And what we actually noticed is that we wanted to use these factors more to kind of not put you into kind of loops. So for example, if you're extremely open, this means that you definitely strive of new and artistic ideas, right? So like if you, for example, give you a movie, then it should be a movie that has like an open ending, for example. Let's think like Interstellar or Inception or whatever, right? If you're, for example, someone who's really not open, then you're really looking for something that is very clear defined. And it needs to be very clearly defined to you also, like why you're getting this, right? And so what we actually, and we notice this in really weird things. Like we notice this in a combination of neuroticism. So neuroticism is kind of how worried and emotional you get. And what we noticed there is that in our onboarding, all the questions that were too broad. So for example, if we mentioned the cuisine Middle Eastern, right, which like encompasses a lot of different cuisines, low open high neurotic users would generally say, I don't like it. Because they can think of one cuisine or one dish within Middle Eastern that they don't like. And they would like rather not get anything in that direction rather than get that one thing that they don't like. Versus very open users have the opposite problem. They basically say to everything that they like it, but it's actually not true. So we actually deal with that a little bit to kind of try to see to what we can push you and how we can in future also kind of like make your life in that sense more fulfilled because we have that info, right? Like explain to you that you're getting this movie because you are a very artistic person, right? And I think that's a very different edge to it, and that actually helps a lot with the people around you as well. Like we tried a people matching feature for a while where we use like personality, kind of say like, hey, like you're very extrovert, this person's very extrovert, you're both like on the same agreeableness level, etc. You guys should kind of like hang out and do this.
Yeah, that was one of the questions that I
Yeah.
had was like, oh, will you recommend people for me to hang out with that are going to go to the same concert as me and we should grab drinks beforehand or whatever. So that's really cool to see. I have to ask though, especially as you're starting to extrapolate out in the future, I imagine you are going to start picking up data from different sources that is not the phone, right? Maybe you start looking at I connect my watch to it and you can see my heartbeat and you can see different things. And if we get whatever we get in the next 5 to 10 years, you plug into that too. I want to know, how do you look at ethics and the ethics involved in this? Because I'm sure people bring it up and they're like, ooh, this is like too much in, like, you know me better than I know myself. And that can be dangerous, right?
I think the question here is like, who do you want in your life to know yourself really, really well? And then who do you not want to know? Like, for example, you would want your assistants or your assistant or your girlfriend to know you really, really well because you know their intentions, right? You know this is their goal. Like your assistant, the goal is to help you. Your girlfriend, the goal is to, I don't know, be in a good relationship with you, hopefully. And then you have other people where you're like, well, actually, the intention of that platform or that person is a different thing. And so we look at very much from that perspective. It's like, if the intention is to sell ads, then you should be very careful as to what that system knows about you because it will be able to keep you in there for a very long time because their idea is to keep you in there for a very long time. Now, the question is a little bit, if our intention is purely to get you to, have a better time and live a more fulfilled life, then you as user have to decide like, do I give that up, like that piece of privacy, because I want that and I know what their intention is, right? And this data stays with them and only with them. And I think that's really what like everyone has to ask. But that I think this is exactly the same as when you trust another person, right? It's like if I know it's a friend, I know their intentions. I will give them that data. Otherwise, I will not. And as long as we as a company stay very true to that, I think we'll be on the right path there.
Excellent. Fellas, this has been awesome. I really appreciate you coming on here and talking to us about this and explaining how you're doing recommender systems. It's obvious that you are knee deep in it. I mean, you're seeing some things that others could only dream of. And so this has been enlightening, and I really like what you're doing with the product. As Skylar mentioned to me on Slack while you were chatting, you are saving relationships, and you sold me on this product. I'm downloading it right now, and I'm gonna go see if I can find some people to go
Where
to a museum with
where are you based?
in this small town outside of Frankfurt, Germany.
Ah, nice. I'm from Munich originally.
Okay.
So
So you
yeah,
have
in Germany
recommendations.
we don't. Our recommendations in Germany are like okay, because that's not like our like primary market. I don't know, Skylar, where are you based?
Los Angeles.
Okay, Los Angeles is definitely much better. So
No.
in LA you should no like listen, we're still a small startup. Like if I tell the data team to now do but try like actually put your location into somewhere in the US and just try it out like how it would be. Try to have a few plans, and we're also super happy about feedback. Like when you say like, hey, this was stupid, like tell us, and I will tell Amr. No. um,
Yeah, I'm definitely going to use it next time I go to the US. Like if I'm traveling through New York or wherever, I'm going to use this, as I said, like my ultimate travel
great.
companion.
Definitely.
This is awesome, guys. Thank you so much.